Well, welcome to chapter 2. So chapter 2, we actually start now the SDLC. We actually start by analyzing the business reason as to why we're actually doing this. So the first thing, as we go sort of through the objectives, we got to kind of understand why are we going to create or do all this investment. Sometimes these projects like literally run into the millions and billions of dollars. So why are we going to spend it? And so there's a bunch of sort of initial high-level analysis that happens first, and then we got to start figuring out such things like what are the factors that, I would say, what are the business drivers, but I guess what are the societal pressures, like what is actually the thing causing us to do this project? And then over here in the feasibility section, is it even possible to do this project? And then, you know what, there's probably a lot of different projects out there. How do we determine what projects should be worked on? So the business case itself is justification. We're basically asking for permission for the business to give us the money, the resources, excuse me, for us to start the project, for us to start the project. And of course, we have to understand, again, all that stuff that from the previous chapter, like what is our organization about? For example, when I think of a company like Donaldson, they are very into the manufacturing area, and so that is their overall mission. And you should, by the way, try and learn the mission statement of whatever company you're actually in, and see whether it even aligns to that mission statement. But that mission statement will drive what projects are going to get priority. All right, so first thing we got to think is more strategic now, right? Strategic is sort of long-term planning. Tactical is sort of short-term planning. And to get to strategic, we kind of need to understand the vision, as I said earlier. What's its purpose? What are the, in theory, what are the values? And an interesting thing, which at least a piece of this that you can use if you're in IT or if you're not in IT, is a SWOT analysis. This isn't an IT idea. It's actually just it's an analysis idea. And so SWOT stands for what are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats of a particular proposition. Or you can imagine to do a SWOT analysis on your IT team, or a SWOT analysis on even should you get your degree or diploma or whatever you're getting. There's all sorts of ways, rather than thinking, is this a good idea or a bad idea, you could actually use something called a SWOT analysis to kind of break it down. Now, strengths are I think, relatively obvious. It's what are the strengths of this idea? But here's the thing, strengths are internal to your organization. Opportunities are external to your organization. And you can kind of see sort of the examples here that the strengths of our team, will say, is that we have an excellent web design staff. That's internal. We don't seem to have a lot of turnover internal, and we've recently upgraded our network. So inside of our organization, those are our strengths. Our opportunities is that maybe our company is well positioned to be expanded. We could be the first within our ecosystem in our business to have the software, and it's got high potential for business to business. This already implies external, right? One business is externally talking to another business. So strengths are internal, opportunities are external. Weaknesses and threats. So weaknesses, again, things that are probably working against, not so much the idea, but what are the weaknesses you're trying to sort of compensate for? And threats. Weaknesses are internal, threats are external. So in this case, a weakness inside of our organization is that we're using several legacy systems. Our budget was turned down. Sorry, it's a little close to my heart right now. But anyway, our budget was turned down, and our internal documentation needs updating, which means we're going to have people to do it. All that's inside of our business. Outside, we've got a lot of competition. Competition already implies external, right? The impact of the FCC rules, well, that's government. I'm assuming we're private, so there's something there. And then other firms offer better benefits. So all I want you to get from this is that strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, it's a great deal, a neat tool for you to sort of look at at a particular idea and get an idea about whether you should proceed or not, or how things are going. I know with my team, we were looking at a SWOT analysis of sort of adopting another technology. So it's a good skill. All right, so now we're sort of at the point of planning. We got to basically plan for the project. And so we want to make sure it supports the business. We want to ensure its scope is well defined and clearly stated. So in the case of D2L, for example, never was there a scope inside the scope for D2L to play classical music, for example, to you students to help you guys study. That was not part of the scope, right? What was part of the scope is that it'd be able to handle grades, and it'd be able to handle your courses, your materials. Obviously, you got to be realistic and tied to ideas. And so other, believe it or not, Word and Excel are actually reasonable planning tools for this. We also at Oracle, we're using things like Jira, not so much Jira for this one, but Confluence, some kind of cloud-based sort of solutions as well to get this out, because the people working on this are mostly going to be the stakeholders. All right, and so they got sort of an example of visible analyst, which I think, by the way, must have given money to the textbook people, because they're always talking about visible analyst, and I've never used it. All right, so that's sort of the beginning of the strategic role. Now we got this idea of the strategic planning. The changing role of the IT department. So it used to be the IT department was just off in the corner, but of course now IT is integrated to so many things that we get very, very linked to other areas of the lines of business. And so what happens is that we have to figure out ways to communicate with each other. One of them is sort of this idea of the business case. What's the business case for this particular system? You'll also hear periodically out there, it's not the same thing, but you'll hear the thing of use case, or even another thing is stories. This is once again the cool kids coming up with different words for this, for similar ideas. But the business case would be, for D2L, for example, would be something like, we need a system that will automate the grading for our courses. Right now, this is pre-D2L. Right now, the students basically give all their stuff to their instructors on paper. Their instructors write the grades on paper, then they write it into a grade book. There's plenty of room for error. Some assignments get lost. After a certain period of time, we don't know if the person's been cheating. It'd be so much better if it was basically up on the web. Now, that's a horrible way to say the business case, but that is sort of a business case. And so that's kind of getting to the why. I didn't actually address the cost or how long, and those are very, very tough to do, by the way. What are the risks? Risks if we do it, risks if we don't do it. How are we going to know when we're done? This is so key for scope creep. How do we know when we're done? And maybe there's something else that we could do. I did a project where we actually discovered that if we just change the way someone used the product, we wouldn't actually have to go ahead and make a whole new product. And that was a pretty good savings. All right, so we got all these people asking for requests, and I guess a key here, by the way, here are some reasons, but anyway, and it makes sense, reducing the costs. Typically, this is my area almost. We always need more and more information, but I kind of wanted to get into this part a little bit more deep. Where do IT projects come from? It's like the birds and the bees of IT. Where do IT projects come from? Because when you go into industry, you can't just work on whatever. I mean, there's got to be a reason these projects pop up. And I liked how this thing sort of broke it up to external things happening outside of your business. Because a key here, by the way, is that if your business like Target or Oracle or Donaldson or anything, they don't really want to spend any money on IT if they could help it, because they're busy doing things, right? They're busy doing other stuff. IT's almost always an expense. Even in Oracle, which is an IT company, IT is an expense. And so for us to do a project, there's got to be a good reason for it. Sometimes stuff happens outside of the organization. For example, new suppliers come on, government rules, like for example, taxation rules, or Obamacare is another classic example that came outside, and that caused insurance companies to perhaps change some of their IT projects. Low economies, high economies. When the economy is going bad, by the way, that's when there's more stress on Hennepin Tech and Dakota Tech and any of these technical colleges, because the enrollment goes up. And what can we do about that? However, when the economy is going well, the enrollment drops and then funding gets hit. What are the competitors to your business? If you're Target, you're thinking about Walmart. If you're Walmart, you're thinking about Target. What are they doing actually a pretty good one. This was a Target example, but I'm loving the the ability for me to go and look up where an actual item is and even get it delivered to the store inside the store. I think that's it's probably old technology, but I'm interested to know, does Walmart do that? And will that actually, if Walmart doesn't do that, and they decided to do that, to put the system in place, would that bring new customers in? Would that actually have a revenue impact? And of course, what do your customers need? What do your customers want? All these things are outside of your organization. Inside of your organization, if you have no money, then good luck. And that's kind of what's happening a little bit with us. Oracle's doing fine, by the way, but for some reason, my group's entering a period of austerity. So we now no longer have money. So that's going to affect the way that we do projects. Data legacy, or the new data that you want, the structure of your IT department, what the users inside want, and then over here we've got the strategic plan and top managers, which are definitely kind of related. Moving to the cloud. Oracle, we had this deal, we have to move to the cloud by January 1st, 2020. And so that's the strategic plan, and we got to line up in there. These will all impact what system projects get worked on. Okay, so the system requests. In my world, what happens is that someone will say, we need a system that does this, makes cupcakes. What I end up doing then is typically they'll go to, it's actually called a steering committee, but you can view it as a systems review committee. And they basically get together and they decide, is the cupcake thing more important than the chocolate chip cookie thing? And it's actually a really good way to do that, because first of all, they'll make sure that we understand what we're talking about, like what is a chocolate chip cookie, what is a muffin. But the other thing too that it does is it puts the pressure off of me, because I don't necessarily know what's more important to the business. I'm just this systems analyst dude, right? The business will know. And if I can get them in the same room, the guy who really wants cupcakes and the guy that really wants cookies, they can fight it out in front of upper management. And then the upper management says, sometimes they'll say both, but sometimes they'll just say, no, cupcakes, that's the one that we're going to work on, because it's going to align with this strategic directive. So that's what that's about. All right. I will say the big disadvantage is that my steering committees are only every 2 weeks. So it does affect our agility a little bit. And it also doesn't help that I've got a lot of people in sales in my particular thing. So the sales projects tend to get a lot more bang. So just because people want it, is it possible? That's what feasibility is. Is this possible? And actually the next slide kind of does a good job with feasibility. Rather than just saying, yes, it's possible, no, it's not possible, here's a nice skill that you can use with all your friends. You can actually say, is it economically feasible? Is it technically feasible? Is it scheduling feasible, or whatever that would be? Is it operationally feasible? So here's an example, right? Economic feasibility is basically, does it make financial sense for us to do this, or even can we afford it, right? So that's an economic feasibility. Technical feasibility is, now they're saying, do we have the tech resources, but also, do we even have the technology? It might make a lot of business sense for me to drive to the moon, but I don't have the technology for that. So is it technically feasible for us to actually do this particular project? Scheduling is, do we have enough time? And if we don't have enough time, then we got to think, what bits of the projects do we maybe not do, right? What bits of the project do we maybe not do? This thing I just mentioned earlier, we got to push to the cloud for January 1st, 2020. There's some bits in particular, my operational reporting, I'm not going to be able to get done in time. We all know that. We're cutting that out of the scope of the project. And then operational feasibility. I would say it's not bad here, but I would say operational feasibility would be something like, does it make business sense to do this? Would it make business sense for D2L to play classical music? Not really, right? But it does make business sense to automate the grading system. So they kind of go through the slides and they talk about, one thing about economic feasibility, before I blast through them, is there's this interesting idea here, TCO and then ROI. So TCO is total cost of ownership. We're going to talk more about this in a later chapter, but those of you that own cars know that the sticker price that you paid for the car isn't the total cost of ownership of the car, right? You buy the car, you got to get the insurance, you got to get the gas. Ideally, you got to maintain the thing if you can afford it. And all of that goes into the total cost of ownership of the car. The return on investment is if you take all the benefits and all the costs, are you basically getting a return on the investment? Are you making money? So, for example, and this is a bit sad, but I did a project that ultimately replaced at least the business function of 3 full-time employees. It was pretty obvious there what the tangible benefit was. It was their salaries, and then it was my salary and my time building the thing. So if I spent, let's just say, $20,000 building the thing, and I ended up replacing the salary of $60,000, then the return on investment, actually that'd be a percentage. But anyway, it'd be a $40,000 return on investment. So anyway, these are the kind of things people think about, and also when you're in industry too, I find IT people are sometimes they're like bricks when it comes to this. We're all expenses, so you want to make sure that you're not a super big expense. So for example, at Oracle, legally, I guess through Oracle, I could replace my laptop every 18 months. I don't, because it's an expense that's tied to me, and I'd prefer when they're looking for ways to cut costs, they don't look at me and say, well, Grant's expensive, and they cut me out. When I think about the return on investment on my laptop, there is no real, right? Well, I guess there's got to be some kind of return on investment, but it's not important that my laptop, the one I'm working on right now, is I think about 3 years old. It's not really that important for what I do. However, if I was like deep into virtual machines and stuff like that, then I'd have a good case to maybe get a new laptop. Anyway, just remember, for goodness sakes, you are likely going to be an expense to any organization we come in. So keep your expenses down. All right, they talked a little bit about tangible and intangible costs. I'll let you read those. And then the technical feasibility did. And then in theory, what happens is we get together and evaluate what requests can happen, what might we not want to do, right? And that all goes into this sort of planning stage. Then at some point, we start thinking, okay, we got a bunch of projects. Which ones should we work on? And they kind of listed some factors here about, reducing costs, increasing revenue, improving ultimately the performance. That's kind of getting more information and the serving customers and serving organization. Can the project be implemented in a reasonable time period? I mean, you can see these are all kind of like feasibility things. And then, is it necessary? Like financial, human, or technical? Sorry, not is it necessary? It's saying, is the stuff actually available that we need to work on it? So that's awesome. In the background, you got to also remember there are this idea of discretionary and non-discretionary projects. The non-discretionary projects means you have to do them, and these are actually pretty good examples. Taxation changes, changes to the organization at the end of the quarter, changes at the end of the year, or government mandates. I mean, there are non-discretionary projects, and then there are discretionary projects where you might have a choice as to either to implement them or not, or when to implement them. And you're going to understand all of this by interacting with the managers and users. So we end up basically getting together with the key stakeholders, so the key managers, the users, and the IT staff, to describe the project, talk about who's going to do what, answer any questions, and then invite comments. Right now, by the way, a lot of my work is done over the conference calls. And it is maddening, this part, because people will be talking, you don't know if they're listening. So when it's your turn and you're on a conference call, be an active listener, because otherwise there's a good chance you're going to sign on to something that's going to be a big mistake. And the idea of the call, and in theory in life, is to focus on improvements and enhancements. Don't just sit there and focus on the problems. Don't be ignorant to the problems, but try and be the person that's actually coming up with some, identify the problem and then a potential solution. So here they're talking about how a preliminary investigation could go if you think about it from a textbook perspective. And so we understand the problem, we define the scope and the constraints, we look through the data in the systems, we study the usability, cost, benefits, effectively, this leads ultimately to the feasibility, and then we talk to management. Now, I'm not going to go through all these things in the slides. I'll let you read those, but oh, by the way, notice back here, that's a diagram, right? So we, again, keep using diagrams. This is called a fishbone diagram, which you'll get to do in your homework. So you just keep going through, discussing all this stuff, and then at the end of the day, what you're hoping to do is give something to the management, right? And this is sort of their example of the format of a report, which will likely be done in one of a few conference calls. All right, if you get something this organized, that's great. But anyway, so that was sort of our first crack at basically going through an actual part of the software development lifecycle. It's the very first part. Our next session will be more about actually starting to gather some requirements. The next video, though, I'm going to drop is the assignment. All right, talk to you later.